Welcome back to the Raising Our Vibration podcast, where we explore higher consciousness through spiritual practice. And today, Stephen and I are just really happy to have Stacey Brown on the podcast. Stacey is an author of a forthcoming book called Journey to Soul Center, Discovering the Gift of Surrender. She's also a business owner and a mother of four. And that mother of four is a really important point here, because about 3.5 years ago, Stacey's family had a very intense family tragedy, and that put her on a path, a journey of healing for herself and her whole family, and just put her on a new trajectory in her life. So, Stacey, welcome. Thank you for being here. And if you would just tell our audience a little bit about what happened 3.5 years ago and how that has affected your life, and also relate to this idea that you talk about of turning that pain into purpose.
Well, first of all, thank you too for having me here. This is such a wonderful experience. I would tell you about 4 years ago that I was living the dream. And I would say that I felt like I was in total alignment in mind, body, and spirit. And we never know what challenges our children are going to face. My son, 17 at the time, was a star player on the football team. He was a great student. He was charismatic. And to look at him, you would say that he had everything going for him. He started to dabble in experimenting with substances. And in January of 2019, he researched online how to get high from household substances, and he overdosed in our home. 4 months later, he had an argument with his girlfriend, and totally sober at the time, decided he was going to try to end his own life. And he caused a horrific car crash. By a power greater than us, there happened to be an off-duty firefighter right on the same country road who was helping his wife with her house cleaning business. And he heard the familiar sound of a crash, and he rushed to the scene, and my son was only breathing 1 to 2 times a minute. He stabilized his airway, and he ran up the hill to get service on his phone. And when he turned around, the car was on fire. And this amazing angel happened to have a fire extinguisher in the back of his truck. While my son was in the hospital, I had the realization that the hospital is a very spiritual place, because a lot of lives are coming into the world and a lot of lives are leaving the world. And during that time, I had some of the most life-changing spiritual experiences I'll probably ever have in this life. I would travel back and forth to the hospital every day to be by his side. And on one particular night, my husband and I got home completely exhausted from being at the hospital. And our son was in a medically induced coma, which means that the brain is forced to rest by medication. But in order to re-heal the brain and stimulate the brain, you're woken up for slow periods of time. And during one of the windows of time that day, my son asked to see the pastor of our church. We didn't think a lot of it. We came home, we went to bed. I never remember falling asleep. I felt like I was wide awake. And my son, in this vision, walked into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. And I can tell you what baseball cap he was wearing, what hoodie he was wearing, every detail. And he sat on the edge of the bed and he said, "Mom, I don't know what to do because I've seen this." And in the corner of my room, I saw my grandfather and my husband's grandfather standing with a white, bright light between them. And he said, and if I stay, I have a huge mess to clean up. And then he was gone. The next day, on our way into the hospital, I told my husband, you need to go in the room and ask him if he was in our room last night. I know he was in our room last night. And I waited with the pastor and his wife, and my husband went into my son's hospital room and they woke him for about 15 minutes. And in that time, in two different ways, he confirmed that he was in our room. We went back home that night and the phone rang. The hospital was calling. And they told us that our son was awake and he had insisted that they call us. And the only phrase he would say over and over again was, I was upstairs. I was upstairs. This was just one of several life-changing experiences that I had that propelled me into a greater understanding of who I am. And I had been working as a closeted intuitive for people that I felt comfortable with and I felt safe with. But as I journeyed through this period of time, I recognized that I had lost myself in my son. And in finding myself again, I started showing up in the world the way that I'm meant to. And I feel that that way is through intuitive readings, through Reiki, and through some other practices that I've learned prior to this experience, but tapped into on a different level because of this experience.
That's powerful. So can you tell us a little about how this changed your view of life and of yourself?
You know, for decades, I denied who I was. I believed that getting married and having kids was what I was supposed to do. I never relinquished the programming that I received as a child that was riddled with guilt and shame and regimented religion versus beautiful, expansive spirituality. And so a lot of my decisions in my life were made in guilt and shame. And watching my son struggle the way that he was struggling, I got lost in his pain too. And it reignited my pain, things that I thought that I had released long ago. And it took me on a path of understanding that we are here on this earth to love ourselves. When we learn to love ourselves and truly embrace who we are, we can then serve and love on other people. And I didn't get that concept because I was in so much pain. I had to lovingly release my son in order to save myself. And I had to go on a deep journey of self-love and healing and introspection. I needed support too. I needed support in the journey, but it has been profound. And not one single aspect of my life today, right now, as I'm talking to you, looks anything like it did before this incident with my son. And I often tell people that the day that he got in the car and made that decision, it was like he put the whole family in the car with him. And we all came out with different injuries. We all came out with a different timeline for healing. And for me, part of that injury is that I wear my heart on the outside of my chest now. When I walk into a space, I can sense immediately, energetically, what's going on. I'm aware more than ever before about what healthy relationships look like. And I am releasing anything that doesn't serve me in my highest good. And I've dedicated my entire life to serving. So it's really changed me.
Beautiful. And can you tell us what's happened with your son?
My son has built a beautiful life for himself. He has been in recovery now for just shy of 2 years. He is beyond where we thought we would ever be. Um, he does have some residual health concerns that he has to monitor, but he lives in another state now and he works in the recovery community. And he too has dedicated his life to serving people.
Mm,
It's
beautiful.
beautiful.
Wonderful.
Stacey, I'm really connecting with the beauty of your mission, helping others and healing full time, doing that really as 100% commitment to humanity. And I know as part of that commitment and dedication, you're about to release your first book, Journey to Soul Center, Discovering the Gift of Surrender. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the book, and particularly just for those of us listening who are really so deeply touched by your really deep and profound story, what are some of the tips you'd give to people, practical things, maybe practical techniques, practical spiritual aspects that can help people discover that gift of surrender?
I would love to do that. So I was lucky enough to be introduced to a social media app called Clubhouse. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an audio app and it is amazing. It changed my whole orbit. And I connected with a few people on that journey on Clubhouse. And I made the decision that I was going to fly to the UK. And I had never left the country before. I live in the US. And I went and visited some friends. And one of those friends had a mentor that he talked about a lot. And she worked in spiritual healing. And he placed her book in my hands while I was there in the UK. And I had this very deep spiritual connection. And so I made the decision that I was going to fly back to the UK and I was going to stay there for a month and I was going to study this woman. And when I got to the UK, I wasn't there to study the woman. I all of a sudden realized I was there to write my book. So I went to my friend, Nimesh, who helped me with this entire process. And I said, buddy, I got to write a book. And he was like, that's great. And I said, no, like right now, I have to write a book right now. He was like,
it.
Okay. So it was really interesting how the book unfolded because I started differently than a lot of other authors. I have ADD. And so to sit down and type out a book just wasn't going to happen for me. So I created bullet points of the things, the life lessons that I had learned through the experiences that I've had in my life, namely a lot of the experiences being a mom. And I took those experiences and I audio recorded me telling each chapter. And then I had it transcribed. And then I found an editor in New York. So the process was very unique, but I decided I wanted to put a spin on it. I think it's beautiful when people write a book and they tell a story. But what I want to know is, how are you helping the reader? And so at the end of each chapter, there's a life lesson and there's an open-ended journal prompt question. So I want to help the reader on their journey, not just tell them about mine. So then that's the first thing. Then to answer your question about spiritual things and ways that people can get more in touch with themselves, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. I believe in the power of journaling. I believe that so many of us are distracted by the world around us, and we don't take the time to really unpack what we're feeling and what we're thinking. And so I always tell people journaling is a place to start, but I actually teach a journaling technique because one of the things that I find is people are frustrated when they just try to sit down and unleash whatever it is that they're feeling versus end with a positive spin on it. So I incorporate gratitude and manifestation into journaling and affirmations, some really powerful practices that I think can help us on the journey to self-love. Another thing I encourage people to do is to meditate. Again, the world is moving around us all of the time. But when we take time to really go within and allow that stillness, it is so healing. And I believe that we're all intuitive. I believe some of us have the volume turned up louder than others. And it's a muscle that can be strengthened if we nurture it. And we don't nurture it through all of these crazy actions. We nurture it through stillness and silence and being present. So journaling, meditation, and then another one I really believe in is moving our body. So much of my meditative practice happened out on country roads right by where I live, because there's something really powerful about the way your feet rhythmically hit the pavement and you're out in nature. So take time to connect in nature and move your body. And then, of course, I love the practice of Reiki. Reiki healing has been a blessing to me in my life, and something that is myself when I need it to calm myself, and something that I can use to connect with other people as a hands-on practice. So those are some of the things that I use.
Nice.
No, that's really beautiful.
Nice.
Very beautiful. You
So-
know, I was just thinking, just before Kevin adds to this, is that, you know, here in this beautiful group, you're actually speaking to, you know, 3 people, including yourself, who journal every day, who meditate every day, who move their bodies every day, and we're all Reiki masters and practitioners and teach groups. So I was just thinking how fabulous that is. It's like we're drawn here through a particular synchronicity and synergy that actually speaks out loud like that to the qualities that we also practice every day. So I just love that you've mentioned 4 things that Kevin and I are so present to, and that we recommend people through all our groups and sessions and so on. So yeah, Kevin, I'll tag back to you. But thank you, Stacey. And that was very beautifully said indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah, those practices are powerful. Could you give us an example of a journaling prompt that you find is really effective for people, especially dealing with pain and trying to approach that in a way that's healing and that's not re-traumatizing?
Yeah. So I think it's really easy for us to get lost in our pain. And for me, I was lost in my pain. I think when we get lost in our pain, we lose sight of the blessings. We lose sight of the good things that are happening because we get so lost in the pain. And so this is going to sound like the most simple thing in the world, but I believe in the power of gratitude. I believe with everything in me that gratitude can shift our entire energy, our entire being when we get in a space of gratitude. Now, this is what I tell people all the time. There is a difference between the generic, I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for my home. We are grateful for those things. But what I'm talking about is intentional gratitude. So, like for me right now, I would say that I am grateful for 2 men that I just met who have some of the same daily practices that I do and are light workers just like I am. And that I have the blessing of connecting with them on their podcast. See how intentional I am and in the moment? So, the words I'm grateful for as a journal prompt are some of the most powerful if you know how to use them. And I encourage people to dig deep. You know, you could be grateful for the barista at the Starbucks that you went to who said hello to you, but it's really thinking in the moment about what it is you are grateful for and shifting your perspective. And I think when someone's in pain, gratitude can be the most challenging. And I think that's why it's the most powerful. So for me, when I started in the journaling practice, after everything had happened with my son, I developed this journaling practice. I started just with gratitude. Because when you close the journal, you're in a better space than when you opened it every time. Might sound simple, but it works.
Absolutely. The simplest things can be the most powerful because they're very direct and very clear. Yeah. So, right when you're in the heart of feeling just an intense emotion, like guilt or shame or this pain with your son, how do you experience the journaling process? Like how does it start, and how do you continue with it when it might be challenging, and where do you find it takes you through to right when you're really in the intensity of things?
Okay, so I told you I wear my heart on the outside of my chest, and I am going to tell you right now that I'm also super honest and super real. So you're going to get the real deal here, and that is I didn't. I would come home from the hospital. I would grab a family size bag of double stuffed Oreos, and that was probably the only thing I would consume in the day. And I forgot about my running shoes. And I would go through each day barely hanging on. And we had so many people rally around us in our community. I mean, we were in the newspaper, and we had people showing up with meals, and we had people showing up to cut our grass, and there was constant chaos in our house. And at one of my darker moments, I went up to my bedroom and I walked into my closet and I shut the door and I sat on the floor in the dark and I turned on the music of Lauren Daigle and I let her words be the prayers I couldn't speak. And I broke down. And I stayed in that place, in that space for quite a while, just breaking down. And then I connected with my oracle cards and I started pulling cards in my closet. And then I started getting on social media and pulling cards for other people from my closet. And then I had a surgery that was botched, and I laid in bed for 3 months and I continued to pull cards. And then as I connected more with the cards, I was connecting with myself. And then I was introduced during COVID when I couldn't work, none of us were working. I was introduced to a beauty brand. And I started getting on camera every single day to take care of themselves and to love themselves. And every day when I was doing that, I was looking at myself in the camera. And I was remembering what it felt like when I loved myself and I took care of myself. And then when that happened, then Clubhouse happened. And I started using my intuitive abilities in a bigger way, and my muscle got stronger because I had gone through the process of reminding myself of the healthy habits I had before. So, for that person who could potentially be listening to this podcast right now, and they don't know how to find their way out of the pain, eat the Oreos, cry, get it out, and then decide to put a timer on it and say, okay, I have to start with one thing. Maybe it's journaling. It might not be. It might be going outside for a walk. But I don't want for any moment of this episode for anyone to think that I was able to just jump into these habits. The process of healing, whether it's wounds we can see or wounds that we can't, takes time. And what you do with that time is powerful, yes, but there is a period of time when you're in the pain where all you can do is put one foot in front of the other. I would say you start with one thing for yourself, whether that be the 10 minutes in silence in your closet to cry, whether it be picking up your journal that you haven't looked at in months or years and just writing down the experience of what you're going through. Hindsight, I wish I had documented more. But I know that the journey of healing was slow for me, and I have to have grace for the fact that it took me a while to get to a better place. I know that's a long-winded answer, but it just feels like when you're in that pain, it's hard to see your way out. It's hard. And I definitely felt the darkness.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm hoping that one of your chapters is called Eating Oreos, because I think that
I do talk about it.
Yes, yeah, you do. And I think the other thing in a sense, by you discussing journaling in this very rich way, journaling in essence is you sharing a story with yourself, and Clubhouse is sharing stories with others. So in a sense, it's a type of journaling, just as being on camera and connecting with people is a type of visual journal. I've noticed that particularly with my daughter, because she's 8 and she likes to draw rather than write. So her journals are full of graphics. So I'm aware in the beauty of what you've described. You've actually described a number of different journals: the Oreo journal, the closet journal, the visual journal, and the Clubhouse journal. And I think because we have different perspectives, we definitely have different ways of relating to exactly what you said about journaling. So I thought what you said was just so incredibly beautiful, and that people can recognize the power of honoring every moment, and then that the habits don't necessarily come right on cue, that you have to work gently with them. So thank you for that. And I'm both Kevin and I are extremely grateful for you, this beautiful light worker who, like us, practices gratitude and practices journaling and meditation and Reiki and all the powers of moving the body, because I think the gratitude, for everybody listening, is so important to hear. I feel that oozing out of you, that incredible gratitude for being here and being alive, and for that moment that your son stood in your bedroom. So I'm really, very present to that. I'm curious, the book has that, that major title of the gift of surrender. And I'm just curious again, if you could maybe highlight 1 or 2 or 3 moments where that gift of surrender really spoke to you, where they were perhaps the most poignant tales or stories that would help touch that for people.
I would say probably one of the most powerful things was while my son was in the hospital, he was very sick. At a certain point, he was running a fever of 106 to 107 degrees, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. And we had received an outpouring of love from the community, as I mentioned earlier. We also received a lot of things from people far away. And one of those things was an envelope that had some consecrated oil from the Saint Charbel, who was a healer in Lebanon in the 1800s. I didn't know any of this until this happened. And on this particular day that we got to the hospital, no one was in my son's room with him. It was just him. And I heard, "Get the oil." And I was like, okay. I looked in my backpack and I had the card with me, which I didn't bring cards to the hospital. I walked over to his body with the oil, and he was asleep. He was in a coma. And I placed the oil on across his forehead. I came down to his neck, and as his hands hit his chest for Reiki, I knew immediately what was wrong. And I didn't even think of anything of it. I ran out into the hallway, and his nurse's name was Nora. And I said, "Nora, my son has a massive infection in his chest, and we need the doctors here right now." And she looked at me like I was crazy. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm about to say something to doctors. Like, I'm not a doctor. And I was so fearful. so, so fearful because I was exposing myself, number one. And number two, what if I was wrong? And the doctor called me and I had the moment. Do I speak up and say what I know or do I not? And I had to surrender because it was my son's life. And I just said, my son has a massive infection in his chest. He needs an IV antibiotic. It starts with a C. And she was like, we'll be right there. They came up. There were doctors and nurses around his bed. Within 15 minutes, we knew that he had one lung totally filled with fluid and the other lung almost completely filled with fluid. And the next day we came into his room. There's the IV antibiotic hanging there and big C on the bag. It was crazy, but if I hadn't spoken up and I hadn't let go of my idea of what I thought life was supposed to look like in that moment, I don't know where we would be. I don't know if this conversation would be happening this way. So that was a big surrender. The other big surrender was, and I talk about this in the book, my husband and I really grew apart through this time. He's battled addiction himself. And like I said, the whole family was in the car that day. My injuries and my husband's injuries didn't align with each other. So I surrendered my marriage 9 months ago. I surrendered my dream home in the country. I surrendered my family unit the way that I saw it. But I knew that this book had to come out. I know that the higher power that I believe in would not allow a family to suffer like ours without a bigger purpose. So though it's been deeply painful, yesterday when I came home, a copy of my book was sitting on my front porch. And it felt like it was all worth it. Through the entire time that I was writing this book, I had to relive in very detailed ways some of the darkest days of my entire life. And I didn't have to relive them once or twice. I had to relive them a lot. And in my mind, I just kept thinking about this woman. She's between the ages of mid-30s to 50s. And she's walking in a bookstore with her heart just crushed, not knowing how she is going to face what she's facing and not knowing what's next. And she walks through the aisles of the bookstore and she looks through the religion section and she can't find anything. She finds this little section of spirituality. And her finger runs right along the bookshelf and it stops at my book. And she picks it up and she takes it home. And not only does she resonate with my vulnerability and my pain, but she finds some little nuggets of wisdom in there to help her to keep going. She is the one that I wrote this book for. And she is the one that I am fighting for so hard. So when I tell you the gift of surrender, I have had to surrender over and over and over again for the last 4 years. Right now in this moment, I can tell you it's all been worth it.
Stacey, thank you on every level. And so I'm wondering, for that particular woman who right now is listening and she's about to go to that bookstore when your book is released, how can that person reach out to you right now? So any kind of links you'd like to share, any ways that she and everybody else listening, whom I'm sure will just love to reach out to you. And thank you for
Thank
being
you.
so deeply open.
So I love to connect with people. It's one of my favorite things to do. My book will be available within the next 2 weeks on Amazon and Audible. But if you would like to reach out to me, my email is Stacey, Stacey, L Brown 555 at gmail.com. And then if you want to reach out to me on Instagram, I'm Stacey Brown 555. You can find me there. I'm also on Clubhouse. I have a club called Soul Center. It's a global community, and we love to have people come and share space with us. We have a healing topic every week on Tuesdays. And then on Thursdays, we do an Akashic record room and intuitive readings, and it's beautiful. Everybody's welcome.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I want to thank you so much for being so vulnerable, so honest, because that, I really think that's the entry point for healing, as you've described, is being willing to really feel what you're feeling and be honest with yourself and compassionate with yourself and allow yourself the time that you need. We're in a culture where we think everything needs to be fixed like that, and we move so quickly, and we don't acknowledge and honor the time that healing takes, the time that it takes to unravel the wounds that we've suffered. And so just thank you for sharing really honestly your story and how you've been patient and willing to be vulnerable and honest and take the time that you need. And it's beautiful. And thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me. It is one of my greatest joys to be in this phase of the journey and be able to say, there's a way to pass this knowledge on to other people. And so I feel honored to have this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you all for listening and watching. And we look forward to seeing you again here next time on the Raising Our Vibration podcast. Bye for now.